policy analyst with the Show Me Institute, and everyone's talking about Tom Schweik and the passing of Tom Schweik. His funeral is tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Senator Danforth will be giving the eulogy. And as long as I'm program director of the Big 550 KTRS, we are going to air that in its entirety at 10 o'clock. If we are able to, technology-wise, we'll certainly bring it to you. Many people across the state want to hear what Senator Danforth has to say about the eulogy. But David Stokes, I got a note from you. You want to talk about the auditor, but you want to talk about what a great auditor Tom Schweik was.
He was a good one, and we've had, I think, a lot of our last auditors have been very good. At the Show Me Institute, we use state audits a lot.
Right.
Like, we're familiar with the office.
Right. You're one of the few people waiting for the door to open on a Monday morning.
Right, exactly. Like, the State Auditor's Office has an excellent website. Every audit they ever release is published immediately online. I forget the exact phrasing, but
right.
stateauditor.mo.gov.
Right.
And it goes well into the late 90s that everything they've ever released. And for the work we do at Show Me Institute, we use those audits all the time. They're audits of tax credits, of smaller third-class counties, and on and on. And much of the work we release much of it has an endnote to an audit we've read. And Tom's audits were really dogged and thorough. And the prior auditors work too. There's a consistency. Most of the people who work in that office are career people, career auditors.
Right.
So I was always really struck by the quality of the work. And the thing that stood out to me for Auditor Schweik was about the issue of tax credits, which is something we talk about all the time on this show. When he got into the office, I don't think he had necessarily a view of tax credits. He like many people out there, there's an assumption that they're a good thing. Like, of course, we give people everybody likes low taxes and they do good things, so tax credits are good. But as he began to issue report after report on them, just about all of which found them lacking and they don't live up to expectations and promises, he really was out there saying that we needed to reform the tax credit system in Missouri, and I give him a lot of credit for that.
He went up against some pretty powerful groups while doing that as well.
Oh, the supporters of tax credits. You're talking the financial sector, the legal sector, the construction sector. I mean, this is why it's so difficult to fight all the tax subsidies and tax credits out there, because the special interests that benefit from them are enormous. Now, the average Missourian doesn't benefit from them. The average Missourian pays higher taxes to make up for them. But the special interests that do get them have a great deal of power within both political parties. And absolutely, what he was willing to say, calling for reform, was absolutely impressive, the way he was able to step up to that challenge.
It's really interesting when you look at some of these statewide offices. No disrespect to Peter Kinder, but the lieutenant governor doesn't have a lot of responsibility. Whereas if you really want to get into the, nickels and dimes and pennies and taxes and spending, if you're an auditor, you can really expose bad spending practices, good spending practices. You can do audits of school districts to see if the money is being spent wisely. If you're about good governance, one of the best places to go and perform that is in the auditor's office.
Absolutely. And now one of the structural weaknesses to the office is it does lack a little bit of enforcement provisions. Like, it is able to expose and use sunlight to bring these things to light, and that, of course, can be incredibly effective, and Tom was very aggressive in doing that. But the auditor's office itself, people would be surprised how it doesn't have the ability to enforce many of its recommendations. Now, through proper public exposure, you can get an enormous amount of stuff done.
Right.
But if there's a change that the office may need, just a little more ability to enforce their suggestions would be something down the line. Now, that's a problem for all auditors. I mean, Tom would be as aggressive as he could in making sure follow-up audits were done to again publicize whether the target of the audit was implementing the suggestions and making the necessary corrections.
He now the governor has, I guess, appointed some sort of stopgap measure, because the auditor's work continues on. There's got to be an auditor. He was in the middle of 3 or 4 different audits, including all the Ferguson stories. Last time he was on the show, he was talking about all the different, the ticket revenue, and he was going to do an audit of some of these towns throughout the area. So the auditor's work must keep going on, but Governor Nixon sort of appointed a stopgap until he can really appoint somebody. That's sort of the philosophy I got. That's how I read the story.
That's true. And let's get back to briefly his audits of those 10 cities around the state, which were really abusing the Max Creek law. One of the weaknesses of the Max Creek law, which is the law limiting how much a city can collect in ticket revenue each year,
Right.
is that it didn't have enforcement provisions to it. And hopefully they're going to change that with Senator Schmidt's bill this year in the legislature.
Right.
But the prior laws, they didn't enforce it very well or enforce it at all. So Tom, after all the troubles in Ferguson, looked and said, what's one of the things his office could do? And one of the things they chose to do, and they deserved a lot of credit for, was taking on the cities that everybody knew were abusing that law, and he was going to audit them and expose them, and then hopefully, even under the provisions of the old law, once you prove that they were collecting far more than allowed by traffic fines,
Right.
hopefully they were going to take that money away and put it to the local schools as the law dictated.
And when it's much more insidious. I mean, this is why the auditors, there's lots of ways to hide money, and we've talked about this, and I think I talked about it with him the last time he was on the show, which is you're charged with a red light. You're charged with a speeding ticket, and you then plead guilty to an excessive noise, right? So you pay your $300. It's excessive noise. That doesn't necessarily go into the Max Creek proportion of the monies, the raised, and so even though you are ticketed for speeding, you plead guilty to excessive noise or parking tickets, which is a non-moving violation, which doesn't count. So there's all sorts of trickery ways to do it, and that's why audits of these things was so important.
So important, and one of the jobs of the state auditor is really it's the only oversight mechanism for many of the really small governments in Missouri.
Right.
And I'm talking the counties with 5,000 people. I'm talking the transportation development districts that serve 20 people out in rural Missouri. The only oversight at all that many of these organizations face is the threat of being audited by the state auditor's office. So when we at Show Me Institute look into these small organizations and abuses, the first place we go oftentimes is to the state auditor's office to see what they found out. And so in many cases, you've got excellent information there on the many, many small governments that are so small that nobody pays any attention to them.
Right.
And because nobody's paying attention to them, bad things can oftentimes happen there. And it's great that the state auditor's office can step in and expose that at times. And Tom, like his prior auditors, was very aggressive about doing that whenever he could.
Tell us about Sam Brownback.
We're very excited to be bringing in Kansas Governor Sam Brownback this week. He's going to be doing a public policy breakfast, the type of things we have 6 or 7 times a year here in St. Louis. It's going to be at the Chess Hall of Fame. We're not having it at our offices because we think the crowd will be a bit too big for that. So the Chess Hall of Fame, they're at Maryland and Euclid, not the Chess Club, the Hall of Fame across the street from it, at 7:30 on Thursday morning, 7:30 to 8:30, and Governor Brownback is going to be giving his side about what's going on in Kansas with the tax cuts and the other changes he's made, and it should be great. We do ask that people interested in coming go to showmeinstitute.org and register ahead of time so we know how many people will be there. And then I know your listeners will also get a chance to
he's coming on the show
from Governor Brownback that very morning. He's going to be here in the 9 o'clock hour.
He former senator of Kansas, governor, just reelected, and in the middle of a interesting conversation, shall we say, about taxes and revenue and all those types of things. So somebody who's clearly in the news. Be interesting to listen to what he has to say. What day is that?
It's Thursday morning. Thursday, I think that's the 5th.
Oh, so that's this Thursday coming up.
This Thursday, yeah. At 7:30 a.m. at the World Chess Hall of Fame, Show Me Institute's bringing in Governor Brownback, former Senator Brownback, to talk about what's the real story in Kansas. And again, people interested in attending, go to showmeinstitute.org and sign up. It's free to attend for anyone.
Looking at some of the past auditors that have been in the state, I mean, talk about a leaping ground to other great things. Senator Bond, Attorney General Ashcroft, Claire McCaskill, all of those recent auditors who have gone on to do some pretty powerful things. So.
They have, and a lot of Missourians will remember Margaret Kelly, who served as the auditor for, I think, about 3 terms in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And didn't move on to higher office, but was very, very popular in her term as auditor. So it's a position in Missouri that can do a lot of good, and Tom used it to do a lot of public good.
Yeah. All right. David Stokes, when can we read you? When can we see you?
everything we ever put up. Many of them have footnotes to great audits we've read at the State Auditor's site at showmeinstitute.org.
Thank goodness there are people like you who read those auditors things, because if I ever have a hard time sleeping, I just pick up an auditor's report.
I enjoy this.
I know you do.
This may be sad, but I enjoy reading those audits. There's a lot of good information.
Gotta love you. Gotta love you. That's why there are people like you and there are people like me. You know, give me a woodworking plan and I'll dissect that. But you deal with the auditor stuff. I'll deal with the woodworking stuff. Have a good week. See you Thursday.
Thanks, McGraw.
All right, 8:48 here. Big 5.